Black Girl thought Biker was attacking her. Then he whispered something shocking. It all starts when a young black woman is walking out of a gas station, and a bleeding biker suddenly grabs her arm. She thinks he's trying to hurt her, until he collapses against her and whispers, "Please, don't let them take me back." But that's only the beginning, because when she tries to walk away, he says something that freezes her in place. He knows her name, even though they've never met. And before she can make sense of any of it, dangerous men show up looking for him. Men who say he belongs to them. Forever. Soon, she realizes this biker isn't her attacker. He's the one begging her to save his life. And somehow, his nightmare is tied to a secret from her own family's past. A secret she never knew she was part of. Now she's caught in a storm of lies, danger, and a truth that could destroy everything she thought she knew. What did he whisper that changed her fate forever? And why does a ruthless biker gang want her next? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now. And if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rural gas station as Zaria Jackson pulled her weathered Honda Civic up to the pump. Her blue scrubs still carried the familiar scent of antiseptic from her day of patient visits, and fatigue tugged at her shoulders after hours of caring for others. The small station stood isolated against the backdrop of golden fields and distant trees, a lonely outpost on the quiet country road. Zaria stretched her tired muscles as she got out of the car, her practical nursing shoes scuffing against the cracked concrete. The day's heat still lingered, making the air feel thick and heavy. She inserted her credit card and began filling her tank, watching the numbers tick upward while mentally reviewing her patient notes from the day. "Just need to grab some water and head home," she murmured to herself, replacing the gas nozzle once her tank was full. The station's convenience store beckoned with its fluorescent lights already glowing in the dimming day. She took 2 steps toward the store when suddenly a large hand gripped her arm. Zaria's heart leaped into her throat as she spun around, her nurse's ID badge swinging wildly on its lanyard. A tall man in a leather vest stumbled toward her, his face pale beneath a days-old beard. Dark stains spread across his white t-shirt, stains that her experienced eye immediately recognized as blood. "Please," he gasped, his fingers trembling against her skin. "Don't let them take me back." His eyes were wide with terror, darting frantically around the empty lot before meeting hers. The desperation in his gaze struck something deep within her. Before she could respond, his knees buckled. Zaria's nursing instincts kicked in automatically, and she helped guide his descent to the ground, kneeling beside him on the rough pavement. Her hands shook as she pulled her phone from her pocket, but her voice remained steady as she dialed 911. "This is Nurse Jackson," she said clearly into the phone, years of emergency training taking over. "I'm at the Shell station off Route 12. I have a male patient with visible bleeding, semi-conscious." She kept one hand on the man's shoulder, feeling his ragged breathing beneath her palm. The operator's voice crackled through the speaker. "Emergency services are being dispatched. Can you stay with the patient?" Zaria looked down at the stranger's face. His eyes had grown glassy, but they fixed on her with an intensity that made her chest tighten. "Yes," she answered. "I'll stay." The minutes seemed to stretch endlessly as she waited, monitoring his vital signs as best she could without equipment. His breathing grew more labored with each passing moment, and a sheen of sweat covered his forehead despite the cooling evening air. She found herself speaking softly to him, the same soothing tone she used with frightened patients. "Help is coming. Just try to stay calm and still." His hand found hers, and gripped it weakly, and she noticed the road rash on his knuckles, the defensive wounds on his arms. Whatever had happened to him, he'd fought back. The wail of approaching sirens filled the air just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges. 2 paramedics jumped from the ambulance, their movements quick and practiced as they surrounded the injured man with equipment and questions. "Found him like this," Zaria explained, stepping back to give them room to work. "He's been conscious but declining. Breathing is irregular." The paramedics worked efficiently, attaching monitors and starting an IV line. "We're taking him to county," one of them told her as they prepared to load him onto the stretcher. "You did good staying with him." Zaria watched as they lifted him into the ambulance, his eyes finding hers one last time before the doors closed. She stood alone in the parking lot, her scrubs stained with his blood, as the ambulance pulled away with lights flashing. The evening had grown quiet again, but the peace felt false now, haunted by his desperate plea. "Don't let them take me back." She walked back to her car on unsteady legs, sliding behind the wheel. The sensible thing would be to go home, file a police report tomorrow, let the professionals handle whatever situation this man was involved in. But 20 minutes later, she found herself pulling into the hospital parking lot, the growing darkness matching her uncertainty about what she was getting herself into. The emergency room's automatic doors whooshed open, releasing the familiar antiseptic smell and controlled chaos of a busy evening shift. Zaria approached the front desk, where a tired-looking receptionist looked up from her computer. "I'm looking for information about a patient just brought in by ambulance," Zaria said, suddenly aware of how she must look. Blood-stained scrubs, disheveled hair, the anxiety clear on her face. "From the Shell station on Route 12? The receptionist's eyes narrowed slightly. "Are you family?" "No, Zaria hesitated. "I'm the nurse who found him. I just wanted to make sure he's okay." "I'm sorry, but I can't give out patient information to non-family members," the receptionist replied, her tone softening slightly at Zaria's obvious concern. "You can leave your contact information if you'd like to be updated when possible." Zaria nodded, accepting a form to fill out. As she wrote down her information, movement near the trauma rooms caught her eye. Medical staff rushed past with equipment, their voices urgent but controlled. Through the brief opening of a door, she glimpsed the injured biker on a hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and nurses working to save his life. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his unconscious face, making him look younger than she'd first thought. What kind of trouble was he in? Who was he running from? The questions tumbled through her mind as she handed the form back to the receptionist. Making her way back to her car, Zaria felt the weight of the day settling onto her shoulders. The parking lot had filled with more vehicles since she'd arrived, and the night shift was arriving for work. She should go home, shower off the blood and anxiety, try to forget this had ever happened. But something about the raw fear in that man's eyes, the desperate plea in his voice, had awakened something in her, a need to help that went beyond her professional duties. As she reached for her car door, a motorcycle engine growled in the distance, then another. The sound grew louder, echoing off the hospital walls. Zaria's hand froze on the door handle as she remembered the biker's words. "Don't let them take me back." The night had grown fully dark now, the parking lot illuminated only by widely spaced security lights. Zaria stood beside her car, her heart pounding as the rumble of engines drew closer. She knew she should leave, knew she was possibly getting involved in something dangerous. But instead of getting into her car, she found herself walking back toward the hospital entrance, her nurse's instincts warring with her sense of self-preservation. The automatic doors opened again, welcoming her back into the bright fluorescent light and relative safety of the emergency room. Behind her, the growl of motorcycles grew louder, and she knew with certainty that whoever the injured man was running from had just arrived. The emergency room buzzed with controlled chaos under the harsh fluorescent lights. Medical staff moved with practiced efficiency between treatment rooms, while monitors beeped and phones rang at the nurses' station. Zaria sat rigid in one of the worn waiting room chairs, her blood-stained scrubs drawing curious glances from other visitors. She kept checking her phone, telling herself she should head home, but something held her there. A young nurse in dark blue scrubs approached her, clipboard in hand. "Ms. Jackson? The patient we brought in from the gas station is asking for you. He's quite insistent about seeing the woman who helped him." Zaria's throat tightened. Is he stable?" "We've got him stabilized for now," the nurse said. "Would you mind coming back? Just for a minute? He's refusing to let anyone near him until he talks to you." Following the nurse down the sterile hallway, Zaria's shoes squeaked against the freshly mopped linoleum. They passed rooms where other patients lay, some moaning softly, others sleeping under thin hospital blankets. The nurse stopped at a treatment room near the end of the hall and gestured for Zaria to enter. The injured biker, Riot, as she'd heard staff call him, lay propped up slightly on the bed. An IV dripped clear fluid into his arm, and monitors tracked his vital signs with steady beeps. His leather vest had been cut away, revealing extensive tattoos across his muscled arms and chest, partially obscured by bandages and medical equipment. Despite his imposing size, he looked vulnerable now, his face pale under the harsh lighting. His eyes opened as she approached, and some of the tension seemed to leave his body. "You stayed," he said, his voice rough. "I wanted to make sure you were okay," Zaria replied, maintaining a careful distance from the bed. "The doctors need to treat you properly. You can't keep refusing help." "Don't," he swallowed hard. "Don't call the police, please." A doctor hovering nearby frowned at this, but Riot's eyes remained fixed on Zaria. She took another step closer, her nursing instincts warring with her caution. "You're hurt. You need medical attention. Whatever trouble you're in." "Zaria Jackson." The words came out in a whisper, stopping her cold. His hand shot out, fingers wrapping weakly around her wrist. "They said you'd be the one." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Zaria stared at him, her pulse pounding in her ears. "How do you know my name? Who said I'd be... what?" But Riot's eyes were starting to flutter, his grip loosening as medication pulled him under. A nurse touched Zaria's shoulder. "We need to continue treatment. You'll have to step out now." Zaria backed away from the bed, her mind spinning. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, trying to make sense of what had just happened. How did this stranger know her name? What did he mean about her being the one? The sound of voices drew her attention. Around the corner, two nurses were speaking in hushed tones by the supply cart. "Two of them in the lobby," one was saying. "Looking for the biker that came in." "I saw them. Real rough types. Should we call security?" "Already did. They're asking for someone named Riot." Zaria's heart jumped into her throat. The sound of motorcycle engines she'd heard earlier. It hadn't been her. Imagination. They had followed him here. "Don't let them take me back," he'd begged at the gas station. Now she understood the raw fear in his voice. She peered around the corner toward the lobby, careful to stay out of sight. Through the glass panels, she could make out two large men in leather vests pacing near the reception desk. Their faces were hard, impatient. One had a distinctive tattoo crawling up his neck, disappearing into his beard. They carried themselves with the kind of confidence that came from being accustomed to getting their way through intimidation. The hospital staff were clearly unsettled by their presence. The receptionist kept glancing nervously at the security guard, who looked woefully unprepared to handle two angry bikers. Zarya watched as one of them leaned over the desk, his voice carrying even through the glass. "We know he's here. We just want to check on our brother." The words might have sounded concerned, but there was an underlying threat in his tone that made Zarya's skin crawl. She thought of Riot's desperate plea in the gas station parking lot, the way he'd grabbed onto her like a drowning man reaching for a lifeline. Whatever brotherhood these men claimed, Riot was terrified of them. The security guard approached the bikers, hand resting uncertainly on his belt. "Sir, visiting hours are over. You'll have to come back tomorrow." The larger biker turned slowly to face him, and even from her position down the hall, Zarya could see the guard falter under his stare. The tension in the lobby was building, threatening to snap into violence at any moment. She glanced back toward Riot's room, where nurses were still working to stabilize him. He was in no condition to defend himself if these men found him. But how long could the hospital staff keep them at bay? And what would happen when they inevitably made their way back here? The questions tumbled through her mind as she pressed herself against the wall, trying to make herself invisible. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Sometimes God puts us in the right place at the right time for a reason, baby girl. The question is whether we're brave enough to accept the task He's given us." Looking at her phone, Zarya saw it was well past 9 o'clock. She should go home. Let the hospital security handle this situation. She had no obligation to this stranger beyond the basic human decency she'd shown at the gas station. And yet, they said you'd be the one. The words haunted her, mixing with her grandmother's wisdom, pushing her toward a decision she wasn't sure she was ready to make. Down the hall, she could hear the bikers' voices growing more insistent. Time was running out, and she had to choose. Walk away and try to forget this night ever happened, or step into whatever destiny had brought Riot into her path. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting stark shadows in the antiseptic hallway as Zarya stood frozen between these two choices, her heart pounding with the weight of the moment. From her vantage point in the hallway, Zarya watched the scene unfold at the front desk with growing unease. The two bikers had planted themselves firmly in front of the receptionist, their broad shoulders and aggressive stance making the small lobby feel even more cramped. The overhead fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across their weathered faces, highlighting scars and the kind of hardness that comes from years of violence. "Listen," the taller one growled, running a hand through his graying beard. "We're his brothers. We just want to make sure he's okay." His voice carried a false sweetness that made Zarya's stomach turn. The nurse at the desk, her name tag read Sarah, maintained a professional calm, though Zarya could see her hands trembling slightly as she shuffled papers. "As I explained, sir, we can't disclose patient information without proper authorization. If you'd like to come back during visiting hours tomorrow ain't gonna work for us," the second biker cut in. His neck tattoo seemed to writhe as he spoke, dark ink disappearing under his collar. "See, our brother Riot. He had a little accident. Hit his head pretty bad. He ain't thinking straight." Zarya's fingers curled into fists as she listened. The casual way they dismissed Riot's injuries made her blood boil. She'd seen the raw terror in his eyes at the gas station, felt his desperate grip on her arm. Whatever accident had happened, she was certain these men were responsible. The security guard, middle-aged and slightly overweight, shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. His hand kept moving to his radio, then away again, as if unsure whether calling for backup would make things better or worse. "Gentlemen, hospital policy is very clear about—" "Policy?" The first biker laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Let me tell you something about policy." He leaned over the desk, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that still carried through the quiet lobby. Zarya pulled back around the corner, her heart hammering. She should leave, This wasn't her problem. She had patience to see tomorrow, a normal life to return to. But Riot's words echoed in her mind. They said you'd be the one. How did he know her name? What did it mean? A commotion from the lobby snapped her out of her thoughts. The bikers had pushed past the security guard, who was speaking urgently into his radio. They were heading toward the treatment areas, their heavy boots echoing on the linoleum floor. Something clicked inside Zaria then, a certainty that if these men reached Riot, she would never forgive herself. Without fully understanding why, she knew she had been placed here for a reason. Her grandmother had always said God's plans weren't always comfortable, but they were always purposeful. Moving quickly but quietly, she slipped down a side corridor she'd noticed earlier, one used by staff to transport supplies. Her soft-soled, nursing shoes made no sound as she hurried back to Riot's room. Through the window, she could see him lying there, attached to various monitors but conscious now, his eyes darting nervously toward every sound. She eased the door open and stepped inside. "Riot," she whispered urgently. "There are 2 men here looking for you." His reaction was immediate and violent. He tried to sit up, pulling at the tubes and wires connected to him. "No, no, no," he gasped, his face going pale. "They found me. They'll kill me. I tried to leave the pack. Nobody leaves the pack." "Shh," Zaria soothed, moving to his side. Her nursing training took over as she quickly assessed which monitors and IVs were essential. "I'm going to help you, but you have to stay quiet and do exactly what I say." Working swiftly, she disconnected the non-vital equipment, silencing alarms before they could sound. Her hands were steady even though her heart was racing. From the hallway came the sound of angry voices getting closer. "Can you walk?" she asked, already reaching for the wheelchair kept in every room. Riot nodded weakly. "With help? But where?" "Trust me," she said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Together they managed to get him into the wheelchair. He was unsteady, and clearly in pain, but the fear of what was coming seemed to give him strength. Zaria pushed the wheelchair toward the service entrance she knew delivery drivers used. The door was heavy, meant to keep out the evening chill, but she managed to maneuver through it without making too much noise. The cool night air hit them like a wave, carrying the scent of approaching rain. "My car's in the back lot," she whispered, pushing the wheelchair as fast as she dared across the uneven pavement. Every shadow made her jump. Every distant sound seemed like approaching footsteps. They reached her modest sedan, and Zaria helped Riot into the back seat. He was trembling, whether from fear or weakness she couldn't tell. Just as she closed the door, angry shouts erupted from inside the hospital. "He's gone! Check the exits!" Zaria's hands shook as she jammed the key into the ignition. The engine came to life with a purr that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet lot. She pulled out slowly, forcing herself not to screech the tires or draw attention. Only when they reached the main road did she press the accelerator, putting distance between them and the hospital. In her rearview mirror, Riot lay curled on his side, his breathing labored. The highway stretched before them, dark and empty, leading away from everything familiar and safe. Zaria gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to steady her trembling hands. She had no idea what to do next, where to go, or how she'd gotten herself into this situation. But one thing was crystal clear. She couldn't abandon him now. The night enveloped them as they drove, the yellow lines of the highway sliding past like a countdown to something Zaria couldn't yet see. Her grandmother's old saying about being in the right place at the right time echoed in her mind. She just hoped she was strong enough for whatever came next. Zaria's hands trembled as she unlocked her front door, supporting Riot's weight against her shoulder. The quiet suburban street felt exposed, making her hurry them both inside. Her townhouse, usually a peaceful sanctuary after long nursing shifts, now felt like their only defense against whatever danger lurked in the darkness outside. "Easy now," she murmured, helping Riot lower himself onto her beige couch. His face was ashen, pain etching deep lines around his eyes. The streetlight filtering through her curtains cast strange shadows across his tattooed arms and scarred hands. "I'll get you some water and pain medication," she said, her nursing instincts taking over despite the surreal situation. "Try to stay still. You've lost blood and need rest." In her kitchen, Zaria's hands shook as she filled a glass with water. The quiet ticking of her wall clock seemed unnaturally loud, marking each second of this strange new reality where she was harboring a wounded biker in her living room. She grabbed some ibuprofen from her medicine cabinet and clean towels from the hallway closet. Returning to the living room, she found Riot sitting up straighter, his eyes fixed on something across the room. Following his gaze, she saw he was staring at the family photo wall, her collection of frames showing happier times. But there was something wrong. All the color had drained from his face. "That woman," he said hoarsely, pointing to a photo of Zaria's high school graduation. "The one standing next to you. That's Livia Jackson." The glass of water nearly slipped from Zaria's hand. That's my mother," she said slowly. "How do you know her name?" Riot closed his eyes, pain crossing his features that had nothing to do with his injuries. "Your mother. She was part of the Cinder Pack years ago. Not by choice, really. She kept the books, tracked the money. But she betrayed Vulture, our leader." He paused, swallowing hard. "She stole something from him. Important documents. Evidence that could destroy everything he's built." Zaria sank into the armchair across from him, her legs suddenly too weak to hold her. "What?" "No, that's impossible. My mother was an accountant. But even as she spoke, memories surfaced. Her mother's unexplained absences, the constant moving when Zaria was young, the way Livia jumped at unexpected noises, the way she'd gradually withdrawn from Zaria's life until their relationship consisted of nothing but short, awkward phone calls on holidays. "Last week," Riot continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "I overheard Vulture talking. He said, 'The daughter has the rest. Find the daughter.' That's why I recognized your name at the hospital. That's why I grabbed you at the gas station. I was trying to warn you, but then everything went black. A car's headlights swept slowly past her window, making them both freeze. The beam crawled across her living room wall like a searching finger. Zaria's heart hammered in her chest as she got up and double-checked every lock on her doors and windows. The night suddenly felt very dark, very dangerous. When she returned, Riot had slumped against the couch cushions, exhaustion finally overwhelming him. She handed him the water and pain medication, which he took gratefully. "Try to rest," she said softly. "We'll figure this out in the morning." But as Riot's breathing evened out into the rhythm of sleep, Zaria remained perched in her armchair, every muscle tense. The comfortable home she'd worked so hard to create now felt like a fragile shell that could crack at any moment. Her mother's secrets had caught up with them both, turning her ordinary life into something unrecognizable. Through her front window, she watched the sky gradually lighten from black to deep blue to the first hints of dawn. The familiar sounds of her neighborhood stirring to life, early commuters starting their cars, a distant dog barking, felt oddly disconnected from her new reality. As morning crept over the rooftops, one thought kept circling in her mind. The gang wasn't just hunting Riot. They were hunting her too. She glanced at her phone, wondering if she should try calling her mother. But what would she even say? Years of distance and unspoken hurts stretched between them, and now this. Her finger hovered over Livia's contact information before she set the phone down again. First, she needed to think, to plan, to figure out how to survive whatever was coming. The rising sun painted her living room in soft golden light, but it brought no clarity, no comfort. Only the growing certainty that her life had just violently diverged from everything normal and safe. On her couch, Riot stirred restlessly in his sleep, a reminder that she was now caught up in something much bigger and more dangerous than she could have imagined. Morning sunlight streamed through Zaria's kitchen window as she cracked eggs into a bowl, the familiar motion of whisking helping to calm her racing thoughts. The sound of movement from the living room made her pause. Riot was attempting to sit up on the couch, his face tight with pain. "You need to stay still," she called out, pouring the eggs into a heated pan. "Those stitches aren't going to hold if you keep moving around." "I can't stay here," Riot said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "They'll find me, and when they do—" He struggled to push himself upright. "I won't let you get hurt because of me." Zaria turned off the stove and walked over to him, arms crossed. "I'm already involved. My mother's involved. I need to understand what's happening." She took a deep breath. "And that starts now." Reaching for her phone, she scrolled to her mother's number. Her thumb hovered over it for a moment as memories flooded back. Missed birthdays, hollow. Holiday conversations. Years of distance that had grown like a wall between them. The last time they'd spoken had been Christmas, 6 months ago. Riot watched her silently as she pressed the call button. 1 ring, 2, 3. "Zaria?" Her mother's voice was thin with surprise and something else, fear. "Is everything okay?" "Mom." Zaria's voice cracked slightly. "We need to talk about the Cinder Pack." The silence that followed was so complete, Zaria could hear her mother's sharp intake of breath. When Livia spoke again, her words came out in a rush. Who told you about— Are you safe?" "I have someone here who says you used to work for them, as their bookkeeper." Another long pause. When Livia finally spoke, her voice trembled. "It was a long time ago, after your father left when things were desperate. I needed money, and Vulture. He seemed kind at first. Said he just needed someone to manage his motorcycle club's finances." She gave a bitter laugh. "By the time I realized what they really were, I was in too deep." Zaria sank onto the arm of her couch. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "To protect you, to give you a chance at a normal life." Livia's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "But I did something before I left. I took their ledgers, every dirty transaction, every criminal connection. I hid them somewhere only you would find them one day, if you needed to." "Mom, where? No!" Livia cut her off. "Not over the phone. They might be listening. They've always been listening." Her voice shook. "I can meet you tomorrow. The cafe where we used to have Sunday breakfast, remember? 10 o'clock. "Mom, wait. I have to go. Be careful, baby. Please be careful." The line went dead. Zaria lowered the phone, her hand trembling. Riot had been watching her intently, and now he spoke softly. "Your mother was brave. Leaving them, it's almost impossible." "Why did you join them?" Zaria asked, turning to face him. Riot's scarred hands twisted in his lap. "Foster homes, mostly. Never stayed anywhere long enough to belong. The pack, they promised family, brotherhood." His laugh was hollow. "Took me years to see it was all manipulation. Vulture, he preys on people who are broken, desperate, makes them dependent on him, then uses that loyalty to make them do terrible things." He met her eyes. "I want out. Clean break. There's a federal task force building a case against the pack. If I can stay alive long enough to testify—" "You will," Zaria said firmly. "We'll figure this out together." The rest of the day passed in a tense blur. Zarya called in sick to work, drew the curtains, and helped Riot move around when necessary. As evening approached, she made up the guest room with fresh sheets and extra pillows. "You should take my room," Riot protested. "I'll keep watch down here." "You can barely stand," Zarya pointed out. "You need real rest to heal." Despite his insistence on staying awake, exhaustion soon won out. Riot's head began nodding as he sat in the armchair near the window. Zarya quietly draped a soft blanket over him, noticing how his face looked younger in sleep, less haunted. Making her way upstairs to her own bedroom, Zarya left both their doors open. She lay in bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling, straining to hear any unusual sounds from the street below. The normal nighttime noises of her neighborhood seemed amplified: a car door slamming, a dog barking, the distant rumble of traffic. But she listened most intently for one specific sound: the distinctive growl of motorcycle engines approaching in the dark. Every time she started to drift off, some small noise would jolt her awake, her heart racing until she convinced herself it was just the house settling or the wind in the trees. In the silence between sounds, her mind kept returning to her mother's words. Somewhere only you would find them. What did that mean? Where would Livia have hidden something so important that it had kept her running for all these years? The night stretched on, and still Zarya listened, wondering what tomorrow would bring, and if she was ready for the answers she might find. The morning sun had barely risen when Zarya stood in her kitchen, wrapping a scarf around her neck. Riot sat at her small dining table, looking better but still moving gingerly. "Remember," she said firmly, "stay inside. Keep the curtains drawn. I've left water and sandwiches by the couch." Riot nodded, his eyes serious. "Be careful. If anything feels wrong at the diner, I'll leave immediately," Zarya promised. She grabbed her car keys, double-checking her phone was charged. The drive to Bernie's diner took 20 minutes, the familiar route now feeling strange and dangerous. The restaurant sat just off the highway, its faded blue awning a landmark from Zarya's childhood. Sunday breakfasts here with her mother and grandmother felt like memories from another life. Zarya parked near the entrance, scanning the nearly empty lot before heading inside. The bell above the door chimed as she entered. Her mother sat in their old corner booth, hands wrapped around a coffee cup, head down. Livia looked smaller than Zarya remembered, her shoulders hunched beneath a worn cardigan. "Mom," Zarya said softly, sliding into the opposite seat. Livia's head snapped up, her eyes wide and darting. "You weren't followed?" "No, I was careful." Zarya studied her mother's face, the new lines around her mouth, the shadows under her eyes. "Tell me everything." The waitress approached, but Livia waved her away with a trembling hand. She leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. "I was working as a temp accountant when I met him, Vulture. He said his motorcycle club needed someone to manage their books. Offered twice what I was making." She gave a bitter laugh. "By the time I realized what they really were, they had too much leverage. I knew too much." "What did they make you do?" "Cook the books, hide their illegal income, create shell companies." Livia's fingers tightened around her cup. "I saw things, names, amounts, evidence of everything they were doing. Drug running, weapons, worse. When I couldn't take it anymore, I started making copies, keeping records." "The ledgers you hid?" Livia nodded. "I created a special box, called it my lockbox of truth. Put everything inside: ledgers, receipts, names, dates, evidence of federal crimes." She reached across the table, gripping Zarya's hand. "I hid it where only you would think to look someday, with your grandmother's things." "Grandma knew?" "She helped me escape, kept me safe until I could start over somewhere else." Tears filled Livia's eyes. "I'm so sorry, baby. I thought if I stayed away, they'd never connect you to me. Never thought they'd still be looking after all these years." Zaria squeezed her mother's hand. "We can fix this. Make it right." "Be careful," Livia whispered. "Vulture, he's ruthless. If he suspects you have those records—" They parted with a brief, fierce hug. Zaria drove home, taking a circuitous route, checking her mirrors constantly. Her mind raced, trying to think where in her grandmother's belongings such an important box might be hidden. Back home, she found Riot attempting to do gentle stretches in her living room. His face brightened when she entered safely, then grew serious as she recounted her conversation with Livia. "Your grandmother's belongings," he said thoughtfully. "Where are they?" "Most are in the attic. I couldn't bear to sort through them after she passed." They climbed the narrow attic stairs together, Riot moving slowly but insisting on helping. Dust motes danced in the thin streams of light from the small windows. Cardboard boxes and old furniture created a maze of memories. "What exactly are we looking for?" Riot asked, carefully lowering himself to sit on an old trunk. Zaria opened a box labeled Photos. "Something that would mean something special to me. Something that—" She stopped, staring at the trunk Riot sat on. "Wait, that's her sewing trunk." The metal trunk had always fascinated her as a child. Her grandmother stored fabric, patterns, and notions inside, teaching Zaria to sew on summer afternoons. Together they lifted the heavy lid. The familiar scent of old fabric and sachets wafted up. "The bottom feels strange," Riot said, running his hands along the interior. "Like it's not quite—" He pressed carefully along the edges until there was a soft click. A false bottom lifted, revealing a weathered tin box beneath. Zaria's hands shook as she lifted it out. Inside, carefully preserved, lay dozens of papers, handwritten ledgers, receipts, photographs, names, dates. The evidence her mother had risked everything to save. "This is it," Riot breathed, scanning the documents. "Bank accounts, shell companies, shipping manifests. This could bring down the whole operation, everyone involved." His voice cracked. This could actually work. Zaria looked up to find tears streaming down his face. She touched his arm gently. "Hey, you okay?" "I never thought—" He wiped roughly at his eyes. "Never thought I'd really get out, that there'd be a way to stop them." They carefully repacked everything and brought the box downstairs. The rest of the day passed in a strange, quiet intimacy as they ate sandwiches and talked softly, bound together by shared danger and growing trust. As evening settled over the house, Zaria reached for her phone. "There's someone else we need to involve. My grandmother's friend, Mr. Halpern. He's a retired detective, someone she trusted completely." She dialed the familiar number, heart pounding. When his warm voice answered, she said, "Mr. Halpern, I need your help. It's about my mother, and the cinder pack." A pause, then, "I'll be right over. Don't tell anyone else I'm coming." Zaria hung up and looked at Riot, who nodded encouragingly. They had the evidence. Now they just needed to get it safely to the right people. Outside, a car passed slowly by the house. Zaria drew the curtains tighter, and they settled in to wait for Mr. Halpern, the lockbox of truth sitting heavy between them on the coffee table. The morning sun cast gentle shadows through Zaria's kitchen windows as Mr. Halpern settled into a chair at her dining table. His calm demeanor provided an anchor of stability in the chaos of the past few days. He adjusted his reading glasses, methodically examining each document from the lockbox, while Zaria and Riot watched anxiously. "This is exactly what we need," Mr. Halpern finally said, looking up from the papers. His weathered face was serious but hopeful. These ledgers document years of illegal operations. The photographs connect key players. The receipts create a paper trail that can't be denied. He carefully replaced everything in the box. I have a contact in the Federal Bureau who specializes in organized crime. We can arrange a secure transfer tomorrow morning. Riot's shoulders visibly relaxed. You really think this could work? I do. Mr. Halpern's voice carried the weight of decades of experience. With your testimony backing up these documents, the Cinderpack won't stand a chance. They spent the next hour planning the details. Mr. Halpern would arrange a meeting at a secure location, a federal building in the next county. He'd drive separately to ensure they weren't followed. After Mr. Halpern left, promising to return early the next morning, Zaria prepared lunch while Riot sat at her kitchen counter. The morning's development seemed to have loosened something in him. As she chopped vegetables for sandwiches, he began to speak softly about his past. I was 13 when my mom died, he said, absently tracing patterns on the countertop. Dad was already gone. Prison. Foster homes didn't work out. I was angry, scared. The pack found me living on the streets when I was 17. Zaria paused her chopping, listening intently as he continued. They seemed like family at first. Gave me a place to belong. He smiled sadly. I used to rescue injured birds as a kid, you know? Hide them in shoeboxes, nurse them back to health. The pack made me forget that part of myself. Made me hard. But not completely, Zaria said gently, sliding a plate toward him. That gentle kid is still in there. I've seen him. Riot looked up, surprised by her insight. Maybe you're right. Being here. It reminds me of who I was before. Who I could be again. Over lunch, they talked about the future, something neither had dared to do before. Riot spoke of maybe working with troubled youth, using his experience to help others avoid his path. Zaria shared her dreams of opening a small community clinic. First time I've let myself hope in years, Riot admitted, helping her clear the dishes. Thank you for that. After lunch, Riot insisted on helping organize the attic, despite Zaria's protests about his injuries. I need to do something useful, he said. Can't just sit around being a burden. Together they sorted through boxes, Riot showing surprising gentleness with her grandmother's belongings. He listened intently as Zaria shared memories attached to various items. Her grandmother's favorite teacup, the quilt they'd made together, old Christmas ornaments carefully wrapped in tissue paper. She sounds amazing, Riot said, carefully refolding a hand-embroidered tablecloth. The kind of person who saw the good in everyone. She was. Zaria smiled, touched by his understanding. She would have liked you. The afternoon passed peacefully as they worked, sharing stories and comfortable silences. Zaria found herself watching Riot when he wasn't looking, noting how his intimidating exterior masked a soul yearning for connection and purpose. The trust building between them felt precious and unexpected. As evening approached, they reviewed the plan for the next morning. Mr. Halpern would arrive at 7 o'clock to escort them to the federal building. The evidence would be transferred, and Riot would give his statement. It felt surreal, the possibility of freedom so close. After a simple dinner, exhaustion caught up with Riot. For the first time since arriving, he didn't fight sleep, didn't insist on keeping watch. Zaria stood in the doorway of the guest room, watching as his breathing evened out into peaceful rhythm. No nightmares creased his brow tonight. She felt fiercely protective of this man who had stumbled into her life, bringing danger, but also awakening something in her she hadn't known was sleeping: compassion, courage, connection. Not romance, not yet, but something equally profound: understanding and trust. Later, making her final rounds of the house, checking locks and windows, Zaria allowed herself to feel hopeful. The evidence was solid. Mr. Halpern's plan was careful and thorough. Tomorrow would bring change, but for the first time, she believed it. Might be change for the better. Standing in her darkened living room, Zaria breathed deeply. Maybe, just maybe, everything would turn out well. Not just for her and Riot, but for all the people the Cinderpack had hurt over the years. Justice and healing seemed possible at last. The night settled quietly around the house as Zaria headed to bed, leaving the porch light on as always. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, peace reigned in the temporary sanctuary they'd created together. The early morning sun streamed through Zaria's kitchen windows, painting warm squares of light across the tile floor. Steam rose from 2 coffee mugs on the counter as the rich aroma filled the air. It felt like any other peaceful morning, deceptively normal. Riot sat at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around his mug, looking more relaxed than she'd seen him all week. "Never thought plain coffee could taste this good," he said with a small smile. "Guess freedom makes everything sweeter." Zaria was about to respond when her phone buzzed. One new voicemail. She pressed play, expecting perhaps Mr. Halpern confirming their meeting time. Instead, her mother's terrified voice filled the kitchen. "Zaria, baby, I'm so sorry. They threatened me. I told them where you are. God forgive me, I told them everything." The message cut off. Zaria's mug slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. Coffee splashed across her feet, but she barely noticed. "Riot!" she started to say, but the rumble of multiple motorcycles drowned out her words. The sound grew louder, closer, until it felt like thunder shaking the whole house. Riot was on his feet instantly, his face transformed by grim understanding. He grabbed Zaria's arm and pulled her away from the windows. "Back room," he ordered. "Now." Before they could move, the front door exploded inward. Wood splintered as 3 massive figures burst through, Grim and Trigger in the lead, their faces twisted with cruel satisfaction. Riot shoved Zaria behind him, his body tensed like a shield. "Run!" he shouted, but there was nowhere to go. More gang members poured in through the broken door. The first punch caught Riot in the jaw, but he fought back fiercely, his fist connected with Grim's nose, drawing blood. For a moment, it seemed like his desperation might give him the strength to hold them off. But there were too many. They swarmed him like angry wasps. Zaria tried to help, clawing at one man's leather jacket, but Trigger grabbed her by the hair and threw her aside like a rag doll. She hit the wall hard, her vision blurring. "Riot!" she screamed as they dragged him towards the door. Blood ran down his face, but he was still fighting, still trying to reach her. "Deal with the girl later," Grim spat, wiping blood from his nose. "Boss wants him first." Through her kitchen window, Zaria could see curtains twitching in neighboring houses. Faces appeared and disappeared, witnesses to the violence, but too afraid to help. The roar of motorcycles filled the air again as they forced Riot onto a bike between 2 members. His eyes found hers one last time, filled with despair and apology, before they roared away. Zaria stumbled to her feet, running out onto her front lawn. "Riot!" she screamed again, but they were already disappearing around the corner. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the grass. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer, far too late to help. By the time 2 patrol cars screeched to a halt in front of her house, Zaria was beyond tears, shaking uncontrollably on her knees in the morning sun that now felt like a cruel joke. Officers approached cautiously, asking questions she could barely process. Everything felt distant and unreal, like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. She gave them descriptions mechanically, knowing it wouldn't help. The Cinderpack would be long gone. When Mr. Halpern's car pulled up 20 minutes later, Zaria was sitting on her front steps, still trembling. He took one look at the broken door, the overturned furniture visible inside, and his weathered face grew grave. "Come on," he said gently, helping her to her feet. "Let's get what we need and figure out our next move." Inside, they went straight to the hiding place where they'd stashed the ledgers. The gang hadn't found them. Small mercy in a morning of horrors. Mr. Halpern gathered the documents while Zaria stood in her ransacked living room, staring at the blanket Riot had used, now lying crumpled on the floor. "You should pack a bag," Mr. Halpern suggested. "Stay somewhere safe until—" "No." Zaria's voice was hoarse but firm. "I'm not running. I'm not hiding." The trembling hadn't stopped, but something else was growing stronger inside her. A steel core of determination forged in the fire of this violation. They had taken Riot, thinking they could break both of them. Instead, they had awakened something fierce and unstoppable in Zaria's heart. Throughout the long, terrible day, Mr. Halpern stayed close, making calls, gathering resources. As evening settled over the neighborhood, Zaria sat on her couch, clutching Riot's blanket. She could still smell his scent on it, motor oil, and something uniquely him. "I'm going to find you," she whispered to the empty room. "I'm going to save you." The last light of day faded from her windows as Zaria stared at the blanket in her hands. Her body still shook with aftershocks of terror, but her mind was clear, her purpose absolute. They had taken someone she cared about, someone who trusted her with his life and his hope for redemption. That trust would not be betrayed. Where devastation had threatened to drown her, resolve now burned like a pilot light, steady, unwavering, impossibly bright in the gathering dark. The morning sun crept through Zaria's kitchen window, but she barely noticed its warmth. Her hands shook as she tried to pour coffee, spilling drops on the counter. The ache in her chest felt like a physical wound, making each breath a conscious effort. Mr. Halpern sat at her kitchen table, spreading out Livia's ledgers and old newspaper clippings. His steady presence anchored her, keeping her from spinning into despair. "We need to think like them," he said gently, his voice cutting through her fog of worry. "Every criminal organization has patterns. Your mother's records might show us where they're holding him." Zaria pulled up a chair, forcing herself to focus on the papers before her. The ledgers were filled with her mother's neat handwriting, locations, dates, amounts. Mr. Halpern produced a map of the county, marking spots mentioned in the records. "Here," he pointed. "They seem to cluster their activities in these 3 areas." Zaria's phone felt heavy in her hand as she dialed Livia's number. It rang 4 times before her mother answered, voice thick with tears. "Zaria, I'm so sorry," Livia sobbed. "They threatened to kill me if I didn't tell them where you were. I was so scared." "Mom," Zaria cut in, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I need to know where they might have taken him. Please." There was a long pause filled with shaky breathing. Then, "The Quarry Warehouse. It's where they deal with people who try to leave. Outside town, off Route 12. Zaria's stomach churned at the implication. Mr. Halpern was already marking the location on their map. "Thank you," Zaria whispered into the phone. Her mother's crying followed her as she hung up. Moving with purpose now, Zaria grabbed her old hiking backpack from the hall closet. She filled it methodically. Flashlight, first aid kit, water bottles, energy bars. Her hands only trembled slightly as she zipped it closed. "You're not going alone," Mr. Halpern stated firmly, standing in her kitchen doorway. It wasn't a question. "I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking, I'm telling." He patted the holster under his jacket. "I may be retired, but I still have my permit, and I made a promise to your grandmother to look after you." Tears pricked at Zaria's eyes, but she blinked them back. There would be time for crying later. They took Mr. Halpern's car, less recognizable than her own. The drive felt endless, though it couldn't have been more than 40 minutes. They turned off the main road onto a gravel track, cutting the engine while still hidden by trees. The quarry spread before them, a great wound in the earth. The warehouse sat at its edge, a hulking metal structure gone rusty with age. 3 motorcycles were parked outside. "Remember," Mr. Halpern whispered as they crept closer, using stacked stone blocks as cover. "If anything goes wrong, you run. Don't look back." Zaria nodded, though they both knew she wouldn't leave without Riot. A shout echoed from inside the warehouse, followed by the distinctive sound of flesh meeting flesh. Then a cry of pain. Riot's voice. Zaria's heart seized. "They're hurting him," she breathed, her whole body trembling. Mr. Halpern squeezed her shoulder. "I'll circle around back. Wait for my signal." Zaria watched him disappear around the building's corner, counting her breaths to stay calm. When she saw his hand wave from the far side, she darted to the warehouse's outer wall. A broken side door hung crooked on its hinges. Voices carried from deeper inside, angry, taunting. Another cry from Riot made her flinch. Pressing herself against the cold metal wall, Zaria closed her eyes for just a moment. "Please," she whispered to whatever might be listening, "give me courage." Her heart pounded so hard she was sure it would give her away as she eased through the broken door. The warehouse's shadows swallowed her, and she flattened herself against an inner wall, trying to make herself as small as possible while her eyes adjusted to the gloom. Another shout rang out, closer now. Zaria held her breath, terrified and determined in equal measure, knowing that whatever she was about to see would change everything. Inside the warehouse, shadows stretched like reaching fingers across the concrete floor. The air hung thick with dust and the metallic tang of blood. Zaria's eyes adjusted slowly, revealing stacked crates and old machinery that created a maze of dark corners. Then she saw him. Riot sat slumped in a wooden chair, his wrists bound behind him. Even from a distance, she could see the bruising on his face, the way his head lolled forward. 2 men in leather vests stood near him, while 3 others argued loudly by some rusty barrels deeper in the warehouse. "Boss won't wait forever," one growled. "We need those ledgers." "Kill him now," another shot back. "Send a message." "No, he might know where the girl hid them." Their heated debate drew them further into the warehouse's depths. Zaria's heart thundered in her chest as she watched the 2 guards follow the others, drawn into the argument. This was her chance. She darted forward, keeping low. Her shoes made tiny scuffing sounds against the concrete that seemed deafening to her ears, but the men's voices covered her approach. "Riot," she whispered, reaching his side. "Riot, please." His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first. Then recognition dawned, and his split lip trembled. "You came," he rasped, voice rough with pain and disbelief. "Of course I came." Zaria pulled out her pocket knife, the one she used to cut bandages during home visits, and began sawing at the thick rope binding his wrists. "I couldn't leave you here." The rope finally gave way. Riot tried to stand but stumbled, his legs weak from being bound. He collapsed against her, and Zaria staggered under his weight but refused to let him fall. A shout from the back of the warehouse made her jump. But it was Mr. Halpern's voice, loud and authoritative. "Police, drop your weapons!" The gang members' voices erupted in confusion. Zaria heard running feet, shouts, and what sounded like a scuffle. Mr. Halpern was creating the distraction they needed. "Come on," she whispered urgently, wrapping Riot's arm around her shoulders. "Lean on me." Together they shuffled toward the broken side door. Riot's breathing came in harsh gasps, and she could feel him trembling with the effort to stay upright. But he kept moving, one painful step at a time. The quarry's evening air hit them like a blessing. Long shadows from the setting sun stretched across the pit, creating perfect cover. Zaria guided them behind a rusted excavator, helping Riot sink to the ground. "Just need a minute," he panted, pressing a hand to his ribs. Zaria knelt beside him, her own breathing ragged. She could see his injuries better now. The swollen eye, split lip, and darkening bruises that disappeared under his shirt collar. Her fingers ghosted over his face, gentle but assessing with a nurse's practiced eye. "I didn't think anyone would come," Riot whispered. His good eye met hers, filled with a gratitude so raw it made her throat tight. "Thought I'd die here. I couldn't let that happen." Zaria's voice was fierce despite its softness. "You're not alone anymore." A siren wailed in the distance, then another. The sound grew steadily closer. Mr. Halpern had done more than create a distraction. He'd called in the cavalry. Riot tensed at the noise, but Zaria squeezed his hand. "It's okay," she assured him. "Those are the good guys. Mr. Halpern contacted federal agents this morning. They're coming to help." More sirens joined the chorus, echoing off the quarry walls. Inside the warehouse, they could hear shouting and the sound of running feet. The Cinderpack was about to discover that their power had limits, that sometimes the light really did win against the darkness. The quarry exploded with flashing lights as federal vehicles swarmed the area. Red and blue strobes bounced off the rock walls, turning the dusty air into a lightning storm. Tires crunched on gravel as black SUVs and tactical vehicles formed a tight perimeter around the warehouse. From their hiding spot behind the excavator, Zaria felt Riot tense beside her. She kept her hand on his arm, steadying him. "It's okay," she whispered. "They're here to help." Shouts and the sound of running feet erupted from the warehouse. Agents in tactical gear stormed the building while others secured the perimeter. Through gaps in the vehicles, Zaria could see members of the Cinderpack being led out in handcuffs, their faces twisted with anger and defeat. "Federal agents!" a voice called out. "Zaria Jackson, this is Agent Martinez. Mr. Halpern sent us. You can come out now, you're safe." Zaria stood slowly, keeping one hand raised while the other supported Riot. "Here, we're here. He needs medical attention." Two agents approached carefully, weapons lowered. The female agent, Martinez, nodded reassuringly. "You're safe now, both of you." Zaria reached into her backpack with trembling hands and pulled out the lockbox. This is what they were after, my mother's evidence against them. Agent Martinez's eyes widened as she examined the contents. She called over her shoulder, "Sir, you need to see this." A senior agent joined them, and his expression turned grave as he flipped through the ledgers. "This is exactly what we needed," he said quietly. "Names, dates, transaction records. It's all here." He looked at Riot. "Would you be willing to testify about what you've seen from the inside?" Riot straightened despite his injuries, and Zaria felt pride surge through her chest at his strength. "Yes, sir," he said firmly. "I'll tell you everything I know." A medical team approached with a gurney, but Riot refused to lie down. He sat on the edge instead, allowing them to begin examining his injuries. His hand found Zaria's and squeezed it tight. "You didn't just save me," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "You saved my soul." His eyes held hers, and in them she saw not just gratitude, but a profound understanding of the second chance he'd been given. The medical team worked efficiently, cleaning wounds and checking for serious injuries. Agent Martinez explained they would take Riot to a secure medical facility where he could recover safely and begin the process of giving his testimony. "You can visit once we have him settled," she assured Zarya. "But for tonight, he needs rest and protection." Zarya nodded, knowing it was time to let go. As they helped Riot into a medical transport vehicle, he looked back at her one last time. No words were needed. The connection between them had grown beyond the need for speech. The drive home felt surreal. The same streets she'd traveled that morning now looked different somehow, as if the world had shifted on its axis. Mr. Halpern had offered to accompany her, but she needed this time alone to process everything. When she finally walked through her front door, exhaustion hit her like a physical wave. But beneath the tiredness was something else, a deep sense of rightness, of having fulfilled a purpose she hadn't known was waiting for her. In her kitchen, Zarya opened the drawer where her grandmother had always kept her special candles. She pulled one out, remembering how her grandmother would light them in times of celebration or gratitude. The match flared in the darkness, and the small flame caught, spreading a gentle glow across the room. Zarya closed her eyes, folding her hands the way her grandmother had taught her. "Thank you," she whispered into the quiet. "Thank you for giving me the strength to help him. Thank you for showing me the way." The candle's flame danced, casting warm light across her face. In its gentle glow, she felt her grandmother's presence, as if her legacy of compassion and courage had come full circle in this moment. 2 months after the dramatic events at the warehouse, autumn painted the neighborhood in warm colors. Zarya's life had found a gentler rhythm, though everything felt different now. Deeper, more meaningful somehow. She sat across from her mother at their weekly lunch spot, watching Livia's hands wrap carefully around her coffee cup. The counseling sessions were helping. Livia's shoulders no longer hunched with constant fear, and she could meet her daughter's eyes when they talked. "I'm learning to forgive myself," Livia said softly. "The therapist says it's okay to take small steps." Zarya reached across the table and squeezed her mother's hand. "We're both learning, Mom." Mr. Halpern called every Friday with updates on the federal case. The Cinderpack was crumbling, their operations exposed, their leadership facing serious charges. Riot's testimony, combined with Livia's documentation, had given prosecutors everything they needed. At the hospital, Zarya's nursing took on new dimensions. She recognized trauma in her patients' eyes more clearly now, and twice a week she volunteered at New Beginnings, a support center for people leaving controlling groups. Her grandmother would have been proud of how she'd turned pain into purpose. That afternoon, Zarya was sorting through paperwork at her kitchen table when the doorbell chimed. She wasn't expecting anyone, and a tiny flutter of old anxiety made her pause before opening the door. But there stood Riot, and her breath caught at the transformation. His face was clean-shaven, the shadows under his eyes replaced by healthy color. He wore simple civilian clothes, jeans and a blue button-down shirt. But it was his smile that struck her most deeply, gentle, genuine, reaching all the way to his eyes. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey yourself," she managed, her heart doing a strange little dance in her chest. "They released me from protective custody yesterday," he explained. "Said I could choose where to start over." He looked at her steadily. "I wanted my first step to be toward the one who gave me hope." Zarya felt tears prick at her eyes. "Would you like to sit for a while?" They settled on her front porch steps, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. A gentle breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves. "I've been taking classes," Riot said. "Getting my GED, maybe college after that." "That's wonderful," Zarya smiled. "Any idea what you want to study?" "Social work, maybe. I want to help others find their way out, like you helped me." They talked as darkness softened the edges of the world, about healing, about second chances, about the strange and beautiful ways life could surprise you, about how sometimes the bravest thing was simply believing in possibility. When the evening air grew cool, Zaria leaned against Riot's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. Neither knew exactly what the future held, but they'd learned something precious in the midst of danger. That courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about moving forward anyway, one step at a time, with compassion as your compass and grace as your guide. Sitting there in the gathering dusk, they shared a peaceful silence, two souls who had found each other in the darkness and walked together into light. If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile, don't forget to subscribe. I post daily, and the next story might be exactly what you need to hear.